Zookeepers of Reddit, what's the disturbing, dirty inside scoop on zoos? I have few stories. We closed the baboon exhibit because a baboon had a stillbirth, and the troop was grieving. In reality, they were throwing parts of the infant corpse around, and there was nothing we could do about it. Lions know fully well that they can't get through the glass. They do that just to get attention, and also our lions will urinate on guests if they get too close, which is always funny to see, not so funny to smell. I worked at a zoo, in their museum function, not with the animals. And there was no glass in the big cat's enclosure. There was a giant moat, which the tiger were always playing in, and a 20-odd foot straight vertical concrete wall. You could tell when they were in play mode. They'd pace back and forth along the edge of the moat and suddenly jump in surprise and roll around on their backs. For the casual visitor, they seemed like an oversized house cat. While they absolutely had small cat-like behaviors, I could never for a second forget what that could do. There was one particularly traumatic event with the lions on a very warm and very packed day. The zoo was inside a large park, so various animala wandered through the zoo all day. One unfortunate day, a large deer fell into the lion enclosure. The lion stalked it and ran it down within about 30 seconds and tore the deer to shreds, in front of dozens of horrified adults and screaming kids. I felt kind of bad that so many people saw, but like, circle of life. Story 2. I worked with large tortoises. We had these 5-gallon buckets for cleaning the poop out of enclosures and other buckets for feeding them fresh grass we cut. The first day on the job, I took both buckets into the pen and started by dumping out the grass. Then I went around to collect poop. I heard this awful loud grunting and something breaking. One of the 300-pound males tried to bang the bucket in front of visitors and flattened it. He would even follow me around just in case I might leave more innocent buckets unattended. Story 3. When you're cleaning underneath the perches, parrots will wait for you to look up before taking a crap. They have a good aim. That's how you get crap in the mouth. Don't look up. Commenter. I worked at a veterinary office years ago that had a pet African gray in the lobby. We would have to keep the chairs a good distance away from the cage because he would do this all the time to clients. Some would want to interact with him and go up to the cage. They'd talk baby talk to him and he'd cutely climb toward them on the bars. As soon as he lulled them into a false sense of security, they were doomed, especially the kids. He would also bark like a dog when there was a high population of cats and vice versa. He loved to rile the room up. Or he'd say, "Nice kitty doggy." He was known to ring like the telephone and mimic us answering it. His sound and word vocabulary was huge. One night, I was at the clinic, alone, finishing up paperwork. I was hunkered over the counter concentrating when I hear a deep male voice behind me say, "Hello?" I froze. I knew I should be alone, and no one had come in, or I would have heard the alarm chime. Did someone hide in the clinic until closing? Then I hear it again, almost in a question. I slowly turn and realize it's coming from the cage. That parrot almost stopped my heart that night. My grandfather had an African gray that would mimic both the cats and the telephone. Then when the real phone rang, he would call out, "Hello," would also constantly ask visitors for peanuts. If you asked him what he was doing, he would often respond with either cooking or sewing. Was a real smart bird. Did all this with minimal training. Story 4. Used to work at a zoo. Cold weather makes the animals more active, so go on a chilly day or first thing in the morning to see the best show from the animals. Also, those free-roaming pea bananas are really stupid, and sometimes go in the Lions exhibit and get torn up. Edit. Because of lots of questions about where, this was the Totfous Park Zoo in Idaho. Commenter. You reminded me of a magical memory I treasure. I also worked at a zoo when I was like 16, and I was the only employee working in a little cabin serving food in front of the sea lions. One particular summer, they scheduled me to work on my own there every single day because I was dependable. The sea lions performed a show at 1 o'clock. On sunny days, I was too busy providing food for the humans during the show to see. When it rained, I was blessed. The zookeeper that was in charge of the show had to show up anyways to feed the sea lions. And one zookeeper had asked me, "Don't you get lonely there?" When I just started working there. I said, "Kind of." Ever since, when it rained, with no people there, she would go and perform the whole show, specially for me. I clapped and cheered, and she bowed at the end. On those days, it was me. Maybe one parent and a kid that ran by and stood by the cabin to shelter from the rain. They would buy ice cream and say I had a nice job. I never got to know the name of the zookeeper, but I'm grateful to her. Unrelated, I've also witnessed a group of baboons tearing a pigeon to shreds. Monkeys are savage creatures. Story 5. The poor penguin keepers can never quite get rid of the miasma of dead fish that envelops them. As for me, the stinkiest job I ever had to do was cleaning out the duck ponds. Managed to empty a whole train carriage that evening, even though I had changed and my work clothes were double-bagged. Added, as a teen I worked as a janitor at a private school. One of my duties was dumping out and rinsing the kiddie pool belonging to the duck. The muck on the bottom of that thing, especially in summer, fricking stank. Story 6. Everybody is overeducated and wildly underpaid. Typically, most single people can last about 2-3 years before they have to move on. The ones with longevity have spouses who bring home the bread and let them chase their dreams. Winters suck. Part-time hours and being outside in the cold. The dolphin trainers are stuck up. They are like the jocks in high school. They usually try to stay in shape because wetsuits aren't flattering. They perform daily, and people love them, so they have an ego. You dread when a coworker gets pregnant because you'll have to pick up extra tasks. Another one. I was a keeper aide, which is just an unpaid volunteer who is there to gain experience for eventually working at the zoo. After 2 years of doing all of the zookeepers' cleaning work, I just moved on because the zoo was government-funded, and therefore no one ever left due to the benefits. I enjoyed my experience and the people I met, but couldn't clean cages for free forever. Story 7. Dead zoo animals are sometimes fed to carnivores. There's a farm zoo in the UK that uses crocodiles to get rid of dead cows. The owner once said he'd like the same end when he dies. Story 8. Went on a behind-the-scenes tour of the zoo. Saw quite a few bunnies come out during the tour. The neighboring park had a problem with people abandoning pet rabbits. It was pretty clear the dumb bunnies were getting into predator enclosures. Tour guide confirmed they were regularly getting eaten. Tour guide also indicated other urban wildlife. Raccoons, possums, squirrels, birds were regularly eaten by predators. Said that when they drained the lion enclosure moat for maintenance, it was filled with the bones of small mammals. The most amusing stories were about the orangutans, who are wicked smart. The zookeeper trained them to give over items in exchange for food in case they needed to get something from them in the enclosure. But orangutans are smart and realized if they break things up and hand it back in lots of little pieces, they get more food. They disassembled a radio that accidentally got left in the enclosure, and when there was an opossum in the enclosure, the results were a bit more gruesome. Commenter. I was at a zoo a few years ago alone in a glass viewing room at the orangutan enclosure. It had floor-to-ceiling glass windows, and a huge orangutan knocked on the glass, pointed to my backpack, and mimed taking items out of it and putting them on the floor. I took everything out, put it all on the floor, and showed the empty bag to the orangutan, who went wild and brought another orangutan over. There were these small vents at the bottom of the glass, I guess, to stop it fogging up, and they stuck their fingers through to try and get me to give them one of the items. My girlfriend didn't believe me until we went in, and they did the same with her purse. As soon as anyone else came in, they stopped and acted all casual like they weren't doing anything. Story 9. If you work with the animals, there's a good chance you'll not be able to have any kind of social life between the long hours, weekends, and the stench. I've been kicked out of stores after work because I apparently stunk way worse than I thought I did, even after scrubbing off. And I'm around animals every day, but I still can't stand when otter, Celian keepers are around me in all hands meetings. The rotten fish plus ferrety otter smell combo is a gagger. Meanwhile, I work with apes, and they say that I smell like I haven't showed in a decade. Again, even after I shower. Another one. Oh man, I remember my first day working with foxes. My coworker was giving a tour of the facility to a family where they got to play with the foxes, and she made a big deal to them about, make sure you don't touch anything wet in here. It might be fox pee, and it will absolutely not come out of anything, including skin, and even gave them gloves to wear. Then they left, and she told me to start cleaning. I said, wait, don't we have to protect ourselves from fox pee like you said? She sort of laughed and said, you work here now. Get used to your new smell. Sure enough, I inevitably got some fox piss on my hand. I washed it several times. I smelled it before bed that night, and sure enough, it smelled exactly like fox pee, very strongly. Washing not only didn't remove it, it didn't seem to even diminish it a little bit. By now, I've stopped noticing, but no one else has. Story 10. Not quite a zookeeper, but in training to be one. The zebras and Przewalski's horses are ruthless and will tear apart any unfortunate wild kangaroo that dares break into an enclosure. They love the thrill of the chase and the subsequent kill when they get bored. Story 11. Not a zookeeper, but worked in a zoo's warehouse for a couple years. Next time you go, ask someone which animals are kill on sight in an escape. The answers will surprise you. Lions and tigers are typically on the trank and capture list, but a jaguar the size of a golden retriever is coz. The zoo I was with, the 2 jags were the only animals on site that were on the shoot to kill list. Even the silverback was the trank first list. Edit to answer why. Jags will kill for sport, and if they escape, they will claim an area as their own, then hunt and kill anyone in that area that they perceive as a threat to them or their food. All those videos of jags rubbing their paws on the glass near children, they weren't hungry. The kids just look fun to kill to the jag. Story 12. I used to volunteer weekly at a large zoo, and at one point management started doing monthly dangerous animal escape drills. Someone would run around in a lion onesie, and we'd have to react as if one of the large animals had escaped. It was hilarious, but one of the funniest things I was taught was that if an incident did occur, you have to tell the nearby guests to get inside only once. If after that, they refused to follow you indoors, the protocol was to hole up in the large activity center buildings. You're to leave them there, go inside yourself, and lock the doors. It makes sense because people can be very stupid and you don't want to risk everyone's lives because of one Karen. But it amused me no end that the protocol was to just let them get mauled. Story 13. Former coworker got a job at the aquarium. He was basically the night watchman, making sure nothing exploded when the aquarium was closed. The thing is, he can't actually do anything about it. A ray jumped out of the open touch pool, so he gently picked it up and set it back in the tank. No harm done. Ray is fine. He got chewed the duck out for handling an animal. Policy is to call the expert handler for that department and have them come in to avoid any liability and whatnot. By the time you get them to pick up the phone at 3 a.m., get up and drive into the city, it'll be like 40 minutes asterisk at best asterisk, assuming they came in at all. So his job was really to just stand there staring as the animal suffocated. He ended up quitting when he tried to call out sick because he had the flu so bad, he literally couldn't stand up straight. And part of the job was to walk the narrow hanging walkway over the largest tank in the world, which includes sharks, alone at night. And they told him to come in anyway. Commander, that's strange. I'm an aquarist, and we get mad when life support or education calls us on the radio that something in a touch pool just jumped out, PLS come help. Put it back in! Obviously, we want to know it happened so we can come check on the animal, but put it back in first. I could see if there are different holding systems around with different parameters, and education or LSS might not be reliable to put it in the right place, in the wrong temp, or if it's fresh salt could kill it. But holy crap, if there's a lag time, just tell them where to put it or train better. Added, this sounds like one of those situations where the on-call staff are like, put the duck back in. The night watchman is 100% planning to put it back in, but the mid-level manager of the third-party contracting firm that employs the night watchman on behalf of the aquarium is quoting paragraph 47 subsection 3C of the liability clauses for why that's not an allowable action. At which point, any sensible and caring night watchman learns not to tell the management anything anymore. Story 14. Because their external genitalia looks similar, many spotted hyena populations in captivity are facing extinction due to groups being made of the same sex. Also because they're not seen as fondly as big cats or canines. Unfortunately, edit. I see a lot of people asking about DNA tests. We have to remember these are animals that were acquired years/decades ago from various sources across the globe. Private collections, illegal trade, etc. And again, this is a species most people don't care too much about and is actually faring quite well in the wild compared to other megafauna. Hyenas live in the city of Harar, Ethiopia, like coyotes do in Chicago. Nobody wants to take the time or the money to sort out the best gene flow. And zoo animals aren't just plucked from the wild anymore. Story 15. Partner was a zookeeper in Dallas. Safety protocols for when a large, dangerous animal escapes its enclosure dictate that you lock yourself in whatever room you can get to quickest and grab the nearest weapon, which, for most zookeepers, was a broom or rake for cleaning up animal poop. Story 16. My mom worked at a zoo when I was a kid, and there were some things that were kept under wraps. For one, a hyena escaped once, and they had to track it down. Also, a pack of dogs got into the zoo and killed most of the wallabies. The worst story was that a group of teenagers broke in the 80s and pulled the legs off of the flamingos. That one always really bothered me. Story 17. I worked in two completely different departments, elephants and neonates, but the drama between keepers was insane in both. Like attempted murder level insane. Commenter? We didn't have mad drama, but damn near everyone had slept with everyone. There was a girl from Birds that cheated on her boyfriend, who was also Birds with a guy on small primates. It turned into a whole thing with everyone having an opinion. Based on that other comment about the smell never washing off, yeah, it figures the keepers would all be sleeping together, since who else is going to sleep with them? Story 18. The amount of Jeets who complain to management about paying to go to the zoo, then not seeing any animals is unreal. Like, what do you want us to do? Go in there with sticks and chase them out of their hidey holes? Sorry, buddy, not going to happen. Added. If that's what you're after, I strongly recommend you try to find a zoo with otters and wait till the enclosure is being maintained. The little gits will steal your tools and run away with them, pull your sesquirt laces out, and take it in turn to nip you on the butt and run away. They're hilarious and adorable and endlessly frustrating to work with. They also stink to high heaven too. Story 19. The amount of injuries you can just casually pick up from animals is crazy. I've been kicked in the chest by a kangaroo, attacked by a wombat and a bat, bitten by a monitor lizard and a carpet python, had a rhino charge at me, and been scratched by a macaque. My old boss has this badass scar from a snow leopard attack, and this guy I work with now has his entire left forearm mangled from an orangutan attack. It also shocks you how dumb people can be. There can be a huge sign that says, "Hello, I'm an echidna, not a porcupine," and people will still ask if that's a baby porcupine. You get used to the same jokes every day. Like when you're cleaning up the outside enclosures, in view of the guests. Someone will eventually say, "Oh, what a strange animal. I wonder what kind it is," in regards to seeing a human. Or the amount of people who scream hump day when they see a camel. I have no qualms about picking up animal crap barehanded. I know what my animals have been eating. I know what's in their digestive systems. And to me, that makes it more bearable. I can have long discussions about poop consistency with my coworkers. And in fact, that's what a lot of general health talks are about. Homer's stool was a little looser than normal this morning. I wonder if something happened overnight to stress him out. You get used to being stinky. I currently work 8+ hours with primates daily, and I feel awful for the people who share a space with me when I go to the gym directly after work. Primate poop smells very similarly to human poop. When I was at the zoo, I smelled exclusively of rhino piss, and I could not get the smell off of me. Emu edit. I was cleaning out the emu's outside enclosure and was told not to squat down in front of him as he was in season, that is, its mating season. Well, you can guess what I forgot. I squatted down in front of him to pick up some crap, and I found out the hard way that ratites, flightless birds, do not have a cloaca, and in fact have banana eyes. Orangutan edit. Orangutans are not the gentle giants you think they are. All apes, and I mean all apes, have the capacity to maim/disfigure/kill if you piss them off enough. Don't look primates directly in the eye for an extended period of time. Don't smile at primates, and for the love of God, don't invade their personal space. More injuries edit. Had a piercing ripped out by a macaw, fingers and hands torn up from handling, training canoers and other large parrots. Quite a few nasty bites from small mammals, hamsters, gerbils, ferrets, etc. A few injuries from horses, but nothing out of the ordinary. One more story. Been trying to think of something that would be funny to add from my time, but nothing amusing or abnormal that hasn't already been mentioned here. Lots of stinky and poop. But this triggered a memory. I was in our gator exhibit with 2 senior keepers. I wasn't allowed yet to feed the gators during the show as I was still training, but I was allowed to babysit Snappy, our giant, mean-snapping turtle, aka distract him with food, while the 5 minutes feeding show goes on. Anyways, we aquarist keepers didn't do the talking. That was one of our education staff. She's introducing our gators to the spectators. One is your average-looking gator. The other is leucistic, so she's mostly white. Albino looking but with a few normal color spots and blue eyes. After the education staff says she's leucistic and explains what that means, I hear a big ol' Bubba looking type redneck dude with a kid on his shoulders go, "Look boy, they've got an autistic albino gator." Story 20. I worked at a zoo in a northern country, can't say which as it'll give it away, which had a white tiger, and was quite famous for it. One day the zoo announced the tiger had died of natural causes. Whilst working there a few years after he died, I was told by a keeper that there was actually a problem with the electric fencing in his enclosure, that the zoo managers refused to pay to get fixed, thinking it would be fine. He was electrocuted to death a few weeks after they found the problem. They covered the whole thing up by saying they weren't sure how he died, but that he was old. It's still a zoo secret to this day. Commenter. I really respect my local zoo, John Ball Zoo in Grand Rapids, Michigan, for being honest about an accident that happened a few years ago. They had a very, very popular stingray and shark petting tank. I loved it, and always paid extra to be able to hang out with them and pet them. Unfortunately, one night there was an electrical issue of some kind, and I believe they were electrocuted to death. Everyone was devastated, and they haven't replaced the stingrays or sharks, and never will even though they were very popular. Zoo staff are honest with guests about what happened even now, years later. I respect them for not lying or covering up the accident, and instead using it as a conversation to be able to talk to folks about how important it is to properly care for animals and prevent accidents from happening. Story 21. If you're a guest feeding, touching animals outside of the petting zoo or an encounter, you might just kill them. I could rant about this forever. The number of zoo animals that die from incorrect food in their systems is staggering. The average person has no idea which animals can be killed from an apple core, a piece of bread, or a grape. Even just picking leaves and grass from outside of the enclosure. A guest has no idea what an animal's digestive system cannot tolerate and can place a death sentence on an animal just because they wanted a special interaction. Let's talk about diseases. Our good pal rabies is a great one. Rabies vaccines are not produced specifically for every exotic animal species, so a vet will do the best they can by giving high-risk animals the closest version of an appropriate rabies shot. The closest version does not guarantee no rabies. You tried to touch a monkey that is undoubtedly covered in saliva from grooming? Better go get your rabies shots. Not to mention the abundance of parasites and human foreign diseases that exotics can carry, or we can pass on to them. Told her, if you feed or touch a zoo animal that you weren't supposed to, you might kill it and should probably go to the doctor. Story 22. I spoke to a zookeeper at the National Zoo in DC. We were watching another keeper inside the cheetah enclosure, and I asked him about the danger involved. He said a cheetah is harmless to an adult human because it only hunts smaller creatures. I asked which creature was the worst to go in with, expecting hippo, elephant, or croc as an answer. Without hesitating, he said zebras, then leaned close and whispered, They are the biggest assholes. They will bite and kick for no reason. I still think it's hilarious that off all the teeth and claws out there, it's stripped donkey horses that are the worst. Added, my sister worked on a wildlife preserve in South Africa, and she said the same thing. Whenever I asked her how her day was going, she would just reply, duck zebras. Story 23. Be careful walking by the open-air monkey enclosures because poop isn't the only thing they'll fling at you. It's like that scene from Silence of the Lambs when Clarice is going to see Hannibal Lecter. You know the scene I mean, only much, much worse. Edit 1. Source. Worked at a small local zoo as a teen for a summer, primarily in the primate enclosure. I've seen things, man. Unspeakable, horrible things. Story 24. Rhinos may look super intimidating, and they can hurt you, but really they just act like big dogs. They love being scratched and will eat all the fruit out of your hand. Story 25. I volunteer at an aquarium, and the people always ask about whether the sharks that are in with the fish ever eat the fish. Officially, we say, we keep them well fed enough that they don't, but on more. Then one morning on my initial walk around, I have found remains of fish that definitely weren't feed fish. On a particularly memorable occasion, I found the head of a large pea just sitting on the bottom. A diver went in and got it before guests arrived. Story 26. Some people like to bring fruit and stuff to throw into the animals' cages, even though they're not supposed to. If you're around and someone throws a pineapple into the gorilla or chimpanzee dens, GFO, they will throw that thing full blast at someone. I saw a man get hit full force right in the side of the head and he was lights out. Pineapple exploded on impact. Paramedics came and everything. Story 27. My wife was a zookeeper and I used to volunteer there a lot. 1. Most of zookeeping is just picking up poop and delivering food. 2. The animal that was least scary was a cheetah. They were pretty cool ignoring everything as long as they had food. The most scary to me were the giraffes. Back then, you went into the enclosure with them and they'd sometimes swing their heads around and try to hit you just to BS. You had to be careful. 3. The job would actually be fantastic if they didn't let people into the zoo. Story 28. The path to being a keeper is rough. It can literally start with working a concession stand at a zoo with a college degree making minimum wage, and the path to mobility being talking to the other keepers to the point they'll let you clean the cage of the animals they keep. Do that a few years and hope that position opens. Not necessarily one that you want, but any, because getting in the door is hard, high demand, low supply. It is a job where you really need to love the work and be okay not making much money. Source. Friend followed this path at a zoo that is known the world over. Story 29. Used to work at a zoo a few years ago. An elephant died while I was there, and to transport the body out of its enclosure, they had to chop him up. Rip Toto. Story 30. Fun fact about the local zoo I learned when I worked maintenance. There's a wolf enclosure. There is info about the wolves. It's maintained. They are just shy in their shelter ATM. There are no wolves, never was. Story 31. There's no dirty secrets as far as shady practices or anything. But if you mean literally, oh yeah, it's dirty. I cleaned up over 100 pounds of cat crap just today. And even after I showered, my husband still says I smell overwhelmingly of cat pee. Story 32. I heard about this from a coworker at a small zoo I used to work at. If any animal escapes before the zoo opens to the public, the zoo is supposed to shut down completely for the day. Often though, for smaller zoos, they can't afford to lose a day open to the public. So if some specific types of animals escape, such as reptiles or small animals, they will just keep open while having keepers look for the animal. This sort of thing wouldn't fly by me on my days as a keeper. I never had anything escape other than a harmless tortoise. But I remember hearing from other coworkers that they just listened to our boss and opened, even though a small but somewhat venomous snake was on the loose. Story 33. The most dangerous, feared animal in case of an escape is not, as you may think, lions, tigers, or other large carnivores. It's the chimps. Those things will rip your arm off and beat you to death with the bloody end as soon as look at you. Story 34. Worked in an animal refuge in Bolivia. We were told on our first day not to let the tapir turn its back on you. Forgetting that vital piece of info, 3 days later I was filming the tapir as it starts to turn its back on me and my friend. Before we could react, its schlong did a 180 and projectile cummed all over my phone and gaping mouth. We couldn't get rid of the smell for days. If you ever come close to a tapir, do not let it turn its back on you. Story 35. Not a zookeeper, but someone who has designed equipment and caging for zoos. I was told many horror stories how some animals would get hurt or even killed because of trying to find ways out of their caging. They can range from really stupid to incredibly brilliant. Had to replace a giraffe indoor pen. The previous one had vertical bars. Think old jail cell bars. A bull giraffe stuck his head out, then turned and went back into the side to see what's behind him. He freaked out and essentially hung himself. So we couldn't use vertical bars that they could stick their head through. Witnessed a silverback gorilla having a bad day. He seemed tired of the crowd and put a box on his head to make the world go away. People kept watching. He kept getting annoyed and finally threw the box off, charged us, and pounded on the glass. I'm well aware that glass can take several shots from a .50 cal rifle, but the explosive bang from the gorilla hitting the glass was insane and terrified everyone. Ostriches run on instinct primarily. I designed a cage for the vet to treat them. It was entirely enclosed and had multiple small doors all around the cage. The reason is the vet told me about an instance where an ostrich got its foot cut and needed stitches. They got the bird in the cage, and one vet fed bird and the other stitched up the cut. No anesthesia, just a diversion. The bird just kept eating and didn't care about getting the stitches. In a different zoo, they needed to replace the caging of a very large bird of prey. I don't remember the species, but I do remember seeing what its claws did to the aluminum tubing cage they kept it in. The aluminum was shredded, and Westcourt was on the other side was either going to have a bad day or get what they deserved for pissing off this bird. I, of course, went with stainless steel heavy-gauge rod for the cage. The shop hated all the welding, but in the end, the cage was way nicer and stronger than the old one. I didn't get to travel much with the installation crew, but I was in the shop supervising the building of caging. There were many times I had to have things re-welded or redone because of safety and QC issues. Remember when you visit a zoo, that oftentimes your life is depending on someone that wasn't qualified, underpaid, and overworked. Whenever I visit a zoo, I look at the structure design and how it was put together. Too many times I see welds that are of poor quality and barely hold the structure in place, let alone stop something big and heavy that's pissed off. Edit. Thanks for all the rewards. I don't work in a zoological field anymore, but I'm happy to answer questions. Story 36. Okay, as is tradition, not a full zookeeper, but when I was a teenager in the 90s, I did volunteer work at the Oakland Zoo. There weren't many of us, so we got to choose where we helped out. So I chose to work with Bhakti, the 32-ish-year-old Bengal tiger, nearly oldest living in captivity when he finally passed. I chose him because he was beautiful, and he always seemed lonely. He had pacing syndrome hardcore, so his entire paddock was green and lush, except for the paths along the outer fence line and one or two diagonals he used to get into and out of his night cage. The keepers did their best with him, but had clearly written him off. He was grumpy, unsocial, hid from the public, swiped and hissed at keepers, and ignored all of the enrichment toys and food put out to keep him mobile. They had a few young Siberians in quarantine already waiting to be put on display. They just had to wait for him to pass, and the stubborn old cat lived to spite them. He always started the morning by pacing his fence line, so I started pacing with him. No eye contact, no sounds, just walking back and forth for an hour or two. After a couple weeks, he started chuffing at me when I arrived, so I learned how to mimic it to say hi back. Another month, and he would actually break his pacing circuit to walk with me, jogging his ancient arthritic ass from wherever he was across the green sections to match me. Poor guy just needed a friend. I still get a bit misty-eyed thinking about him. Just a lonely old cat who had to spend the last years of his life basically alone. Don't get me wrong, though. The keepers really did do their best. But they couldn't spend all day with him like I could. They had many duties and creatures to care for. And he had a really steep barrier to entry as a friend. As grumpy as he was, I still think he was good people. Story 37. If you have worked with them, then you probably already know. But one swift kick from an ostrich can kill you. Like they will literally disembowel you. Every time I see a video of someone getting up close to one, I can't help but cringe. One of our head keepers had actually lost part of their ear to one. Story 38. Aquarist of 10 years. So I'm one of the people who reeks of fish all the time. Getting the smell of squid you've prepped off your hands is only possible with bleach. Artificial insemination of large sharks, for the purposes of developing procedures for vulnerable species, is as interesting as you might think. One day, our vet used a broken popsicle stick as a speculum on a blacktip reef shark, and every female aquarist at the procedure collectively shuddered. Squishing sperm out by squeezing the claspers is oof. When I started as an intern, my supervisor said we are glorified janitors. People don't realize how technical being an aquarist is because we care for the system that keeps everything running and all of the filtration. I know how to plumb, drive a forklift, and I'm great with all sorts of random tools. Between cleaning the filtration that collects poop and scrubbing algae out of my exhibits, I really am a fancy janitor. The things people seem to find most interesting are 1. Fish, including large sharks, have complex behaviors and can be trained. The goldfish memory thing is a myth. 2. We can anesthetize fish, including large sharks, and keep them alive out of water. We pump water with anesthesia in it into the mouth, and it then runs out over their gills, allowing them to take up oxygen and the anesthesia. You can do this while they're up on a procedure table that looks like a human surgery table, so you can do whatever surgery or procedure is necessary. We give veterinary care to even the tiniest of fishes and invertebrates. Their welfare is excellent. The nastiest and saddest thing I've seen is necropsies on wild rehab sea turtles when they either died in the wild or we weren't able to save them. Going through the intestinal tract to look for impactions, usually plastic-like balloons, is especially gross, and there's a smell that never leaves your nose. Do everything you can to reduce your use of plastic and vote for things that will help our planet. The tough part of the job is the interpersonal aspect. Managers used to be aquarists, and aquarists are animal people, not people people. People skills don't come naturally, and neither does managing. Coworkers can also be judgmental and toxic. Pay also sucks, and the job is completely exhausting mentally and physically. It isn't unusual for me to walk 5 miles a day on top of diving for hours and climbing 50 flights of stairs. Then there's the mental aspect of always worrying about your animals or if you made a mistake that could hurt your animals. It's not a job you turn off at the end of the day. That being said, the job is amazing. I'm a coral specialist, and caring for coral is like being an awesome underwater gardener. Getting paid to go open ocean diving and to go to conferences in cool cities to share knowledge with others is super amazing. Story 39. I worked in the zoo's restaurant, so I didn't get a lot of info on the animal side of things. The one thing that even low-level cashiers learned, though, was the Mr. Wallaby code. The manager on duty in each department carried a walkie-talkie, and if an animal ever escaped, the code to announce its location was, "Mr. Wallaby, please meet Mr. Escaped Animal at Animal's location." I kind of hoped we'd have one with a small, harmless animal that would be easy to catch again, just to see the excitement. Making chicken salad sandwiches all day got a little monotonous. Story 40. The job is 24/7. Even where you're not working, you're still working. And it's like 90% cleaning poop, pee, and food leftovers, food containers, and buildings. And answering some very dumb questions such as, is the cheetah right there the youngster of a lion? That kind of question truly make you understand how dumb people can be and how much they need to be educated about wildlife. If you're working with small primates, you will be peed on at least once in your career. Birds can show love in a quite painful way, but you still love them because they are way smarter and amazing than most people know, and you always watch you back, and never turn it to some species. TW. The skin between an hippopotamus nostrils is super smooth under the hand, but yeah, don't pet them for no reason next. And sometimes you will just have to stand in front of an enclosure for hours in order to monitor your animal's behavior. They like to give this job to trainees or interns. Story 41. I'm a small animal vet now, but worked in a zoo before vet school. Zoos are one of the biggest purchasers of Calvin Klein's Obsession cologne. The cologne has animal musk in it, and it drives the big cats wild. We used to spray it on everything. Story 42. I had to draft the zoo's contingency plan for all sorts of emergencies. Flood, tornado, extreme heat, war, or attacks, you name it. The plan included a prioritized list of which animals in the collection we would have to sacrifice to feed to the other animals in extreme situations. I literally created a zoo food chain. Humans were left off the list entirely. Story 43. I did co-op at one for 2 weeks. The Sumatran tigers had a nice enclosure, but the overnight enclosure was very small and depressing. I would walk around the outdoor enclosure hiding meatballs while they were in there, and I was always scared someone would forget I'm out there. There's nothing like that smell of tiger urine. As soon as I first smelled it, it's like an instinct kicked in, and all the hairs on my body raised as if I just knew there was something close that could kill me. Also, so many people drop money beneath the walkways. I found a few $5 bills. Story 44. What do you want to really know? Zookeepers are overworked, underpaid, and are constantly in a battle to prove their worth to seemingly everyone. We spend day and night, and sometimes overnight, caring for our animals, often regardless of our personal lives, because those animals deserve the best life possible. And at the end of the day, the most abused thing at the zoo is the zookeepers themselves. I had a guest tell me one day that they thought the gorilla would be happier dead in the wild than in his habitat, while also knowing absolutely nothing about what is impacting gorillas in the wild. I've had parents point at me cleaning a habitat and tell their children, stay in school or you'll end up like her. In fact, I'd say a decent percentage of guests in my 10+ years were extremely surprised to hear most zookeepers have degrees higher education. Zoos need our support at the end of the day as they provide education and experience that can build empathy. We have to teach people to care, and it's hard to when sometimes things aren't affecting the immediate world around us, but is instead affecting someone else's across the globe. Why is it important to recycle your old cell phones? It will reduce the need to mine for coltan, a mineral used in cell phones that can be recaptured in the recycling process. Less coltan mining equals less loss of habitat for gorillas, among other animals. Do you check the labels of items you buy for sustainable palm oil? If not, you could be helping add to the destruction of orangutan habitat. Our actions matter, our choices matter, and we have to teach that. Edit. Thanks for my first gold. I actually left my job of 12 years over a year ago because it was physically and mentally draining me too much. I miss it terribly, but know it's what is best for me. Story 45. Not a keeper, but worked at an AZA zoo for 6 years, and was lucky to work with life science staff often. In the case of that zoo, and it isn't unique, keepers are required to have a bachelor's degree and make poverty wages. Treated like crap and paid like crap because there are always new, young graduates that want it as their dream job. Pseudo-intellectualism is used to create a strict hierarchy between the majority of the keeping staff and the few in management and leadership. How something may look for a paper or philanthropic effort takes precedent to actual animal welfare. There was an intense in-group culture to ingrain delusions of grandeur about sporadic, piecemeal wildlife conservation efforts being done. The keeping staff mostly stayed sane by making truly deep relationships with the animals they care for. These animals are definitely loved and treated the best those individuals can, despite frequently terrible decisions and mandates from leadership. Story 46. Late to the party, but I wanted to mention all the older animals. Sometimes people don't realize there are older critters who have health issues. A lot of older fish we had were kept in the back tanks away from view because people assumed normal old fish issues were a result of poor husbandry and would get upset if they were on display. Imagine having your 17-year-old incontinent dog in a zoo. People would think it looks emaciated and pathetic. Along the same lines, zoos have improved significantly in terms of animal husbandry over the years. But a lot of older animals have been in zoos since before these changes occurred. I remember working with a group of chimps, and one of the old chimps would masturbate while staring at me as I cleaned the outside of the enclosure. I had to remember this guy joined the zoo at a time when they would dress chimps up in kids' clothes and make them have tea parties and crap. He had some mental issues that weren't his fault. Thankfully, that troop has gotten better housing and care and has now started acting more normally, even reproducing with their own troop members and acting like real apes should. Story 47. Former monkey keeper of around 5 years. I worked at a sanctuary for rescued animals or individuals that were not deemed valuable for breeding programs because of disability or overrepresented genes. You would assume people need lots of qualifications to work with exotic animals like monkeys. This is completely untrue. The most important thing is experience, and you can get that at some really crafty zoos. It astonished me how little science and understanding went into the primates we cared for. Our lemurs had chronic diarrhea due to the unsuitable high-sugar diets that they were fed. I made significant efforts to change this, but I don't think the keepers ever listened to me. Escapes happen way more often than you think. One time our geriatric groundskeeper caught an escaped baby macaque in a net with what was a very lucky leap. Another time, visitors were fascinated to see our langurs sitting peacefully on top of one of our enclosures. They had made it out through a hole in the enclosure. Visitors throw stones, rocks at the monkeys all the time. I would catch people once every couple of weeks. Monkeys truly are vile. I love them, but they are so gross. My favorite monkey was a rescued individual from Israel who was so prone to violent mood swings that he had to live by himself. Every morning, he would wait until the keepers arrived to make his breakfast, and he would sit at the wires having a wank. Oftentimes, he would try and get you to shake his hand, but usually he just ate his ejaculate. Story 48, not a zoo. But I worked at a local science center as a part-time guide, and one of our most popular exhibit was this incubator with baby chicks. We were told to tell visitors that the older baby chicks would be sent to schools as classroom pets, or to the petting zoo. In reality, we did send the chicks to the zoo, as live animal feed for the snakes and other carnivores. Story 49. Management can make a huge difference to a zoo, but it's incredibly hard to convince anyone you have a bad manager. Take Steve Burns, for example. He was hired over a decade and a half ago to be the business side manager of Zoo Boise's nonprofit wing. At the time, the zoo decided to merge that position with the head of animal care. So despite having no actual animal knowledge, Steve became the director of Zoo Boise. He then went on a long tirade of making the zoo more and more like a business, promoting people who are going to do whatever he wants and not ever question him, cutting down the budgets as much as possible, and engaging in business practices that would help him but ultimately harm the zoo. If he didn't like you, he would find a reason for you to be fired as quickly as possible. Once, despite being elected to the head of the AZA, elective governing body of zoos board at the time, he rushed construction on an exhibit so it could be grandfathered into meeting requirements he knew were coming down the pipe from AZA that would mean his new exhibit wouldn't qualify as quality for that animal. He gave an inordinate amount of the zoo's budget to conservation, which is great for conservation. But Zoo Boise at the time was at a critical moment for the zoo, where it was expanding and needed more staffing, better exhibits, and better animal care budgets. And all those were limited for his giving. After he directly contributed to the death of a major animal at the zoo with his policies, he got a job directing at the Hogle Zoo. At Hogle, he did everything in his power to make it like he left Zoo Boise, cutting budgets for staff education and training, getting rid of programs designed to help staff in their future careers, increasing volunteers so that staff would be deemed unnecessary. He once said he thought the whole zoo could be run by volunteers. When the coronavirus happened, he used it as an excuse to cut any and all staff that would stand in his way, including decades of experienced keepers. At the end of last year, he finally left the zoo world to focus only on conservation work, which is good because that's pretty much the only thing he was good at when it came to zoos. Sad that in his wake, he left 2 steaming, ravaged carcasses of zoos that now are struggling to be what they once were or could be if Steve Burns never touched them. That's why when people ask about my job, I always say almost everyone at the zoo is there to make the animals' lives as good as possible. Edit. I forgot to say that despite everything he did managing institutions at both zoos and donors all loved him, even when his staff was actively petitioning for anyone to care about what Steve was doing. Story 50. I work with dolphins. These creatures are sexual. We have 2 smaller boys together and they've been seen stimulating each other. Our 3 female dolphins have freshwater hoses that lead into the pool to play with. They flip themselves upside down, lay on the surface, and let the water do its thing. We also have another male dolphin separate from the others that likes to show his banana to families. Pretty funny to watch TBH. Dolphins are weird. Story 51. Not a zookeeper, but married to one. She's really there for the animals and doesn't care to deal with the general public, and especially loathes the people who yell or scream at the animals, or people who can't control their kids, or who tell them to make the animals do something or come out, or who make the same mundane comments like, "must be a human exhibit," when the keepers are in an enclosure. There's usually not a day that goes by where I don't hear another rant about some annoying patron or patrons at the zoo. Story 52. Worked for a little while at a small zoo. The amount of care and love the keepers have for the animals is amazing. There was a small monkey who had become ill and needed to be put down. I was kind of surprised how upset all the keepers were. I had assumed they would become desensitized to things like that after having worked there for so long. Kind of a part of the job thing, but if anything, it is the opposite. That said, I heard a very horrific story. One of the keepers used to know a keeper who worked at a very famous zoo park back a few decades ago. That park had an island in the middle of the lake with chimpanzees on, and the keeper, a big pose, would use a high-pressure hose to get the chimps back into the enclosure when needed. One day, a big male chimp managed to escape and swim across to the main part of the zoo, ran round but didn't hurt anyone until he saw the water hose keeper. The chimp went full pelt at him and knocked him down, tore at his face and castrated him, and tore some of the ligaments in his leg. One of the other keepers had a gun, but it jammed, and he had to use the butt of the gun to get this chimp off the other keeper. Story 53. Not a zookeeper, but there was a water animal park in the Netherlands where the caretakers had to get off the dolphins to keep them from attacking each other. Story 54. Animals sometimes kill other animals, and there really isn't much that can be done about it. I remember when a groundhog made it into a chimpanzee exhibit, and the baby of the group found it. She caught it and played with it for a long time. Eventually, to keep it from running away, the baby beat it to death right beside the viewing windows. She then held it like a stuffed teddy bear for another half an hour, dragging it around with her when she went to forage. Mind you, this happened right in front of a group of school children. I was in the viewing area and a teacher chaperone insisted that I do something. Like, what? Ma'am, that's a chimpanzee. Nobody's doing anything. The kids actually learned something on that trip to the zoo, though. Story 55. And what do you do with all of the poo from all of the animals at the zoo? On Doe's book doesn't actually answer the damn question. Edit. Thanks for all the answers. I'll be showing this to my kids when they wake up. Story 56. Ayanas, but have received a few tips from more knowledgeable people. Go to the zoo on a cool day. On a nice sunny day, all the animals will prefer to stay indoors or out of the sun. Wear black clothes. It's much easier to see and photograph through glass when your own reflection isn't getting in the way. Get there early and immediately move to further reaches of the zoo. If you're ahead of the crowd, you'll see more interesting behaviors as the animals won't be so bored of people yet. Story 57. Zoo work is like a lot of not-for-profit work. You do it for the love, not the money. Love doesn't pay the bills, so not everyone laid along. The ones that do are usually a little kooky. Story 58. Was a zookeeper for a while, and now work exclusively with non-human primates. It's not a dirty secret like Op was asking for, but wanted to chime in and say please don't berate keepers because you don't agree with zoos. We almost all went to college for animals. We love them far more than you, most likely, and it's really disheartening to be trying your best to make sure your animals are comfortable and happy, only to have some housewife who donated to PETA like 2 years ago tell you that you're a piece of crap. We need responsible zoos for wildlife donations since the vast majority of animal rights activists don't do jack crap to actually help animals. If you have a problem with the way an animal is being treated, report it to the APHIS immediately. Don't berate someone who has dedicated their lives to helping animals because it makes you feel special. Story 59. If you see a zookeeper doing a training session and they do not have a microphone on them, please do not try to talk to them. I have to step up with our jaguars multiple times a day in full view of the public. 95% of the time, people are shouting questions at me mid-training session. I'm working with a dangerous animal that could kill me, or seriously injure me, even through the barrier that's always between us. All of my attention needs to be on that animal. Please do not talk to me until I am finished. Any other time, I absolutely love talking to people about the animals I work with. Story 60. I volunteered at an animal rehabilitation sanctuary a while back. When I went to clean the ducks' enclosure, I found out that the males will if given the opportunity. Story 61. I volunteered at a zoo a few summers ago. I worked in the birdhouse. The job mostly consisted of chopping fruit, filling bowls with live mealworms, and cleaning. Oh my God, so much cleaning. Captive penguins have trouble swallowing on their own, so you have to kind of shove fish down their throat. Oh, and the more social ones will hump your leg. It involves a lot of wing flapping. Some of the cutest parrots are the most evil. There were a few nasties, likely because they pair bonded to a singular person or bird long ago and are now separated. There's a bird at that zoo with clipped wings that occasionally sits on a perch outside without a real cage. He's not going anywhere from there, but he sleeps in the indoor enclosure. When being trained on how to feed him, I was told not to fall for the sweet, "I love you" spiel. He goes for the eyes. I would use my hand as bait under the cage so he would move away from the door, then quickly swap out his food plate before he realized my other hand was actually in reach. Brand new baby birds are both cute and horrifying to behold. They had keys, which are an incredibly smart species of large parrot. We'd give them boxes full of fruit that they would have to take apart a certain way to get in, and they loved it. I heard they've been known to occasionally ruin people's engines for fun in New Zealand, but that could be a rumor. It was a great summer. Story 62. This isn't a zoo I worked at, but did visit often. Operators couldn't figure out why the sharks in the mixed species tank kept turning up dead, so they set up a couple cameras, and it turned out there was a ducking psycho octopus just killing for fun, hiding between rocks, waiting, and then just strangling them to death. Story 63. Flamingos are territorial assholes. Whenever I cleaned their enclosures, I would have to go in with an umbrella to scare them away to prevent them from attacking me. Story 64. All animals are on birth control. When it's time to breed, the keepers will go on a database similar to a Harmony for zoo animals to find the perfect match for their animal. It takes years sometimes to get the right couple together, transferred, adjusted to each other, etc., all to have one baby. This is to prevent inbreeding and overpopulation. Zoos are there to educate, not populate species, and only do so to keep the zoo population healthy, since no zoo takes from the wild or breeders. Looking at Tiger King. Story 65. The baby chicks you see in the zoo farm are food for the reptiles and other animals. There are also animals that were raised by humans that never rehab, but this isn't told patrons, so they don't continue to interact with the animals as pets. There's a behind-the-scenes chimp and gorilla enclosure with apes that won't ever rehab. There's a female chimp that is the most aggressive, and she absolutely hates men. She was tortured by catchers who cut off her arm. She is too dangerous to keep with other chimps, so she has lived in solitary confinement for over a decade now and won't ever live like the other apes in captivity. Story 66. Not a zookeeper, but do animal cognition research in zoos. Biggest thing I learned was that many zookeepers love their animals, that the Association of Zoos and Aquariums, AZA, has really high standards for care, and that many species have a nationwide breeding program. So that new baby chimp you see at the zoo? That was planned far in advance. The genetic variation between parents and within the social group was carefully calculated, and there may have even been a swap out of another animal to make space for the baby. Basically, all that stuff about zoos being sad and unethical are the exception, not the rule. Good zoos are there to conserve, protect, and make sure that their animals are healthy both physically and cognitively. Story 67. If you have to choose between cleaning the poop from a flamingo enclosure or an elephant enclosure, choose the elephants. The flamingos were by far the smelliest exhibit, and elephant poop is heavy but comparatively odorless. Story 68. I worked an extra job at a major big city zoo and at concessions area. I had a golf cart to get around, delivering supplies and maintaining equipment in the various concession stands. The best part was that I could go where the public couldn't go, and petting the rhinos' faces and horns in the rear of their enclosures at a hugely strong steel fence was the highlight of my weekend. Dirt. I do recall that about 3 or 4 months after the concessions company started selling a well-known named frozen yogurt, I was standing with the concessions manager and his assistant when I heard the assistant make an offhanded observation, "Man, this yogurt is selling like crazy." And then the manager replied, "You're right, let's raise the prices." Story 69. Obligatory, not a zookeeper comment, but I thought this story was too funny to not share. Monkeys live on a tiny little island in a sunken circular enclosure. Someone throws some gum at the monkey. First monkey is smart enough to open the wrapper and take out the gum to chew on. Not sure if he swallowed it or not. Other monkey taps on his shoulder, holds out his hand for some gum. Gum monkey, in all his wisdom, Does the ducking dad trick where he hands the other monkey the empty wrapper reformed to look full again? Monkey unwraps it, sees there's nothing, and slaps the other monkey across the face out of anger. So the ultimate realization was that dad humor predates humans. Story 70. I used to work at one as a university student. We found a human finger in the tiger enclosure, but nobody stated they had their finger bitten off, employee or guest. So where did it come from? The old zookeeper just shrugged and tossed it in the garbage. WTF? I quit when I caught a virus from the lion-tailed macaques? Story 71. I was an intern at a zoo in college. The strangest animals will terrify you to your core. I would willingly put my hand in the cheetah cage to pet it while it was purring, but there was one enclosure that would terrify me to clean. It was a cage that had these African chickens. I don't remember the species. And there was this one named Stevie who was ruthless. Every keeper warned me about him, and he was a two-keeper job. One would distract him in the outside, from outside the fence, while one went in to close the door to lock him outside so you could clean inside. I remember the one time while I was cleaning, he somehow climbed up to the one window that was above my head, and when I spotted him, it was like the psycho music ringing through my ears, and I couldn't get out of there fast enough. Still sends a chill down my back. Story 72. Knew a marine biologist who, along with most of the experienced staff, left a place in my country because animal welfare was no longer pertinent. Animals were becoming sick and malnourished. Unkempt enclosures and stressed out animals. Keepers mean customers get bitten. All political backhanded deals and corporate S took over the management. Some of the keepers had been there 25 years. They didn't decide to leave lightly. In my fantasy, I hope they get bitten and contract something nasty before they're forced to hand the whole thing back. Story 73. Zookeepers can only stand to hang out with zookeepers of the same kind of animal because of the smell. No matter how much you scrub or change, the smell clings. Primate keepers smell like they haven't bathed in a decade. Snake keepers smell cloyingly unnerving, and Celian people make you gag from the fish smell. Story 74. Not a zookeeper, but lived next to the Atlanta Zoo for 15 years and used to drink with a few. The Atlanta Zoo does a lot of work with primates. One way to tell if a keeper is a primate specialist is to see if they have all their fingers. Some primates bite, and they love to bite off fingers at the last joint. Also, watching a video of several keepers trying to get a chimpanzee back into his enclosure was one of the funniest things I think I've ever seen. He wasn't fighting them, just not interested in going back in. By the time it was done, about 15 minutes, I think 3 of them had black eyes. Story 75. I work with chimps in an amazing sanctuary. Some were pets, were used in labs, babies, etc. Even after taking multiple evolution classes in college, I never quite had the same understanding of how close we are to them until now. Just their behaviors with themselves, each other, and us just makes it all make sense. It's a hard feeling to describe. I wish I could share that with the world. On a side note, please do not support anything involving having primates as pets. Pet primates are dangerous, and they are physically and mentally destroyed forever. Also, if anyone has any questions about sanctuaries, zoos in the field, feel free to comment. Story 76. So my best friend is a zookeeper, bird keeper, at a zoo that has a renowned aviary. He has told me that most birds are just constantly horny and are never gentle. If you wear anything bright, they will try to duck any appendage that gets near them. They're also smart enough to be vindictive about it, and not just males. He has a mortal feud with a female hornbill for similar reasons. His stories are great. Story 77. In high school, I worked at the Jacksonville Zoo just doing super basic stuff. We had an exhibit of river otters, and one morning the staff noticed there was an extra otter. Not a baby, an extra adult otter. They looked through the security cameras and found that a wild river otter was making his way from the nearby St. John's River and getting into the exhibit to play with the other otters. Because of the risk of disease transmission, we couldn't allow the wild otter to keep doing that, so they reinforced the exhibit to keep it out. It took 5 attempts for them to finally make a wild otter-proof exhibit. It was an ongoing problem for a year. Story 78. Not a zookeeper, but worked at one for a long time. We had a tram tour that drove over a bridge where there were a bunch of crocodiles below. If someone were to fall out of the tram at this point, the protocol was to speed out of the area as fast as possible, so the remaining visitors on the tram would not see the unfortunate person get teared to shreds by the crocs. Story 79. Pretty tame, but 10 years ago, I worked in the restaurant of a zoo, and we sold this homemade African soup in this themed restaurant, but in reality, it was Chinese vegetable soup from a bag. Also from the employee lunchroom, we could see the inside of the giraffe enclosure that guests could not see. There were several tallies being held, ranging from zookeeper slipping in poo to amount of giraffe erections. Story 80. I volunteered at a zoo for approximately 4 years. The otters ate absolutely anything they could get their paws on, in an open-air exhibit that included a lot of birds and squirrels. The same is true for just about any carnivore omnivore in an open-air exhibit. It's just that the otters were particularly good at it.